About 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement, and although it tends to get better with age, it's still about 1 in 4 Americans, even when you look at Americans 55 years of age and older. In fact, just this year, Business Insider found that about 50% of Americans will live on $30,000 and less. So because there are a lot of videos talking about retirement, I was actually surprised to learn that even though my audience is in their late 20s to early 40s or early 50s, there was still a lot of interest in how to retire with $0 or how to retire with nothing saved. And of course, while I wouldn't recommend that, that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'll start with average net worth in America. Answer the question, do we really have a retirement crisis in America or across the United States? I'll talk a little bit about how to live in retirement on a low income, and then I'll wrap up with how to retire even if you have nothing saved. Typically, I like to use median income because I think that's a better representation of most people's experience. However, I'll give you both median and average for comparison points throughout the course of this video. When I'm talking about median, I'm talking about the middle. So that's usually going to be meaning that most Americans make 50% more and 50% less. How do you calculate median? You take the entirety of whatever population you're looking at. In this case, I'm looking at the United States, and you find the figure in the middle. Whereas when talking about average income, you take the totality of the population and you divide by that population. Average is typically prone to outliers, so that's why I don't like to use average, especially when we're talking about something like income, when someone could make $0 and someone could be a billionaire. So in most cases, when you hear me talking about income throughout this video, I'll be talking about the median. Here's a complete breakdown of net worth in the United States, with the median net worth being around $192,000 and the average net worth at a new record high of about $1 million. Net worth is assets minus liabilities, and if you've never calculated your net worth, you can find a link below as well as the video description on this image here, where a free net worth calculator is available on NerdWallet. Business Insider then gave us a breakdown of net worth by relationship status, and while we would expect couples to have 2 times net worth, they actually have about 3 times net worth because couples are able to not only combine their finances, they're also able to benefit from the compound interest of those joined finances. Now, like I do in all my videos, I think it's helpful to give us some bookmarks because the numbers are cool, but what do people actually think about these numbers? So what does the average American consider rich? Well, the average American considers wealth a net worth of $2.5 million, according to this study from Bloomberg. And in a change over the years, more recently, Gen Z is more focused on money than anyone else. Around age 30, a lot of Gen Z, or who would be around age 27 in 2025, thinks that they'll have a salary of around $200,000 by the time they reach age 30. And when we look at a breakdown by generation of what Americans say the minimal figure they need to be financially successful, from top to bottom here, boomers think you need a 6-figure salary to be successful, which makes sense because back in the day, 6 figures was able to buy you a pretty successful life in the United States. However, when we scroll down here to Gen X and millennials, we think you need a salary of around $200,000 to be financially successful in the United States. But superseding all of us is Gen Z with a salary of $600,000 to be successful in the United States. Overall, Americans think you need $270,000 gross before tax to be successful in the United States. So what salary do you need to be rich in the United States? According to Americans, you need to double that figure, which makes sense. So $270,000 to be financially successful, $520,000 gross salary to be rich in the United States. Of course, as usual, that looks nothing like the reality in the United States. The median male earned a salary of $60,000, while the median female had a salary of $45,000, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. The average male earned $84,000, while the average female earned around $61,000. Now, I've got a whole video on this topic if you want more information here. I'll link to all 3 of those in below, where you can look at what the average male makes in totality. Y'all then asked me to do a breakdown of the average single male versus the average married male. And then I did a full video looking at American women in the United States. Not sure if this is good news, but it is news. Marriage rates, birth rates, and divorce rates are all down, but I figured I'd go over household income anyway. Women marry around age 28. Average household income median is $80,000. The average household income is $114,000. And on the right side here, you can see a breakdown of median household income in the United States by age of head of household. The U.S. Department of Justice also drops median family income by size of the family for a 1, 2, 3, or 4 income earner. You can find your state in this table here. And of course, income varies greatly around the United States by education level, region, and cost of living in the state. This map of the United States breaks down median income for workers, so we'll be a little bit higher than median income across the United States because workers who tend to work 30, 40, or more hours a year tend to have higher incomes than the median income at around $45,000 to $50,000 a year. And we also found, or at least if you watch my other video, that married men actually tend to be the highest earning incomes in the United States, with their incomes peaking around age 47 to 54, and that income being somewhere between 87 to over 6 figures. Now, I think most relatable to this audience is middle class income in the United States. Now, there is no technical definition of middle class in the United States, but one of the most popular definitions is to take the median household income in that state, gross income from the U.S. Census Bureau for that year, and choose a range from 2/3 to 2 times to get the range of middle class in the United States. I've broken that down for you in this table here, where you can find your state, or you can find the range of incomes from each state in this table here, with Massachusetts at the top at number 1 and Mississippi at the bottom at number 50. Now, if you're one of those people who has no idea how much it costs to live in your area, I recommend starting with this free family budget calculator from the Economic Policy Institute. There's also one from MIT that does a cost of living calculator, I believe. You can visit this website, type in where you live, the size of your family, and it will tell you or estimate the monthly cost in your area. A great and free tool to start estimating how much you'll need for retirement, or if you plan to retire with nothing. Cool. Now we know what people make in the United States. We know their annual income. We know their average income. We know their median income. We know their gross income. And we've got a breakdown by middle class. Now, do we have a retirement crisis in the United States? Probably depends who you ask. Here's a breakdown of what Americans think they need to save per year versus how much they actually have saved per year. We can then compare that information to this 2025 study from CNBC, which looked at how much income do you need to retire in every state around the United States. Of course, I went ahead and pulled that down for you in this table here, and you can find your state, and you can look at the average annual cost of living according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. They use the 4% rule to define what that would then mean you need to save for retirement. Just for a simple definition, the 4% rule means you save 25 times either your expenses or your gross income to hit your retirement goal in your state. Keep in mind this does include housing. Now, housing is somewhere between 30 to 50% of most people's expenses, so you can greatly reduce your retirement expenses if you plan to sell your home, or you are somehow able to greatly reduce your housing costs in retirement. We can then compare that to this study from Investopedia. They looked at how much it costs to achieve the American dream in the United States, estimating that'll cost you about $4.4 million as of 2025. Of that, $1.5 million is retirement. Again, they use the 4% rule to estimate how much you retire across the United States. Using those two studies, we can then estimate exactly how much you need to start saving for retirement as of 2025 to reach a retirement goal of $700,000 from age 20, estimating a 7% return. And you can play with these figures by using either the savings goal calculator or the compound interest calculator, freely available to anyone at investor.gov. And here's how much you would need to save each month based on the age you would start. An estimated return of 7%, which of course you can adjust. I'd recommend somewhere between 4 to 12%, and you can find a free compound interest calculator at investor.gov. I'll drop that link below, and you can find it here on the screen. So let's say you do have $0 saved for retirement, or you have nothing saved for retirement, or you don't think you'll ever be able to retire. What does that reality look like? Well, if you're from Canada or over age 60, I'd actually recommend you check out this video, How to Retire with No Money Saved. It's the one that I looked at before I recorded this video here. And while I appreciate you following me on YouTube University here, I still recommend that you partner with a certified financial planner or a fee-only based financial planner to come up with a tailored plan for you. However, we do have some estimates from Business Insider. About 50% of Americans will live on $30,000 or less in the United States. Is $30,000 something that you could live on in the United States, or do you think you could reduce your expenses enough to live on $30,000 in the United States? I'll give you some recommendations from these sources around states and cities that you might want to live or migrate to. And I would recommend staying away from these 100 largest cities because the estimate was around a six-figure salary would be necessary to live in the 100 largest cities in the United States, and that's as of 2025. We can also see here, released in 2025 from Dodge, so pretty up to date from the Social Security Administration, just how much the median benefit is for Americans by age around the United States. And finally, this Boomers Impact Study looked at the most recent generation impacted by retirement, the boomers. More than half of boomers will rely primarily on Social Security. Their median benefit gross for the year will be about $28,000 for men and $21,000 for women. Again, about 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement. How can they retire with nothing? Well, about half of expenses from this most recent study, although this has been the case for the last 5 to 10 years, half of the average American's household expenses go to just 3 categories, and that's food, transportation, and housing, with housing accounting for somewhere between 30 to 50% for the average American. So if you're looking for areas to reduce and have a big impact on your budget, you want to target reducing your housing costs. What does that look like around the United States? As of 2025, median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment around the United States is around $1,500. Here are your highest rent in the United States. So obviously, if you're going to retire with nothing, these would be the cities that I would recommend looking to avoid because they are going to be the most difficult and the most expensive to retire. This study from the New York Times then looked at housing costs for singles and has a breakdown for most income towards rent and least income towards rent. Obviously, I would recommend for retirement or retiring with nothing to shy away or stay on the outskirts of these cities with the highest rent costs because, again, rent, housing, transportation, and food are going to be, well, healthcare as well for as you get into your 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s are going to be your highest expense categories. As of 2025, here's a quick breakdown of the most affordable places to live in the United States, but this does take into account if you're still working because they're looking at median income and cost of living or versus cost of living in those areas. So these still might be expensive if you don't have any other means of income, which is why I always recommend wherever possible looking for passive or residual streams of income. For example, I have a book that I sell on Amazon. I have a small community. I also obviously invest. I have this channel, which I just became a YouTube partner on. I also have an Instagram hustle on, and I have a playlist for all of these where I make somewhere between $500 to $1,000 just for posting on Instagram. And I just got into the YouTube partner program. Obviously, these things might not exist in 50 or 60 years, but I'm always and constantly looking for new ways to make side and additional income, usually targeting somewhere between $500 to $1,000. So just in case I lose my job or I have to retire unexpectedly, I'm not suddenly at $0. On that topic, as it relates to cost of living in the United States, I used to live in one of the cheapest states in Texas and one of the cheapest cities, but like everywhere in the United States, everything has been increasing for all of us, including present company, the guy doing this video right now. On my left here is the most affordable states to live, and on my right are the 10 most expensive states to live. So finally, you are not alone. I personally don't see it as a retirement crisis because, especially if you address it early or you acknowledge it, there are several different ways that you can either earn additional income or prepare for a retirement where you have still saved for nothing. Millions of Americans do it every day, and obviously it's not something I recommend, but it is a reality. If you want to change that reality, by reminder, here's the recommendation of $700,000 according to CNBC of how much you would need to save for retirement before retirement and based on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, cost of living in every state around the United States. And here is how much $1.6 million from Investopedia you would need to save based on their recommendation for retirement save. If you have $0 saved for retirement or you plan to retire with nothing, drop a comment below and let us know, have you already been successful at doing so, or what is your plan?